All right, let's jump into this deep dive into Chris Broad's Abroad in Japan. This memoir, it takes us on a wild ride through what, 10 years of his life in Japan. And trust me, you'll feel like you're right there with him. We've got his book as our main source, obviously, for this deep dive. And it's packed with hilarious stories, cultural clashes, and those aha moments that happen when you immerse yourself in a whole new world.
What makes this book so special, I think, is how Broad blends humor with insightful observations. He doesn't just tell funny travel stories. He explores deeper themes, like adapting to a new culture, the challenges of learning Japanese, and finding your place in a society that can feel very different from your own.
Yeah, and the way he structures the book as a collection of essays is fantastic. Each essay focuses on a different aspect of his experience, giving us these vivid snapshots of life in Japan. From his first kind of chaotic moments at Narita Airport to his hilarious attempts at navigating Japanese customs.
Yeah, it's a brilliant way to capture those moments of cultural immersion, like his first encounter with a traditional Japanese public bath, or onsen, which turned out to be a lot more, shall we say, revealing than he expected.
Oh, we'll definitely get to that. But first, let's rewind to the beginning. Broad's decision to move to Japan was, well, kind of a spur of the moment thing. He was on a flight, chatting with some folks who had done the JT program, that's the Japan Exchange and Teaching Program, and they basically talked him into applying right then and there.
It's fascinating how a casual conversation can lead to such a life-altering decision.
Yeah,
That impulsiveness, that willingness to embrace the unknown, it really sets the tone for his entire Japanese adventure.
absolutely. And get this, he actually got accepted. So picture this. He's saying goodbye to his family in London, hopping on a plane, landing in Tokyo, ready for this, massive change. But Japan wasn't exactly what he pictured. I mean, it's one thing to read about a place, but experiencing it firsthand is something else entirely.
Yeah, he describes that sensory overload of arriving at Narita Airport, the vast urban sprawl that seems so different from the traditional Japan he had imagined, and even the intense humidity that hits you like a wall.
He actually describes that humidity as feeling like each breath was like inhaling a mouthful of steam. I mean, you can
Hmm.
practically feel it yourself, right? It's these little details that make his writing so immersive.
Yeah, it speaks to the power of sensory experiences in shaping our understanding of a new culture. It's not just what we see, but what we smell, hear, and feel that truly brings a place to life.
And his description of his first Tokyo hotel room is hilarious. He's sharing this tiny triple room with two other JT participants,
Mm.
and their luggage is overflowing everywhere. It's a far cry from that glamorous living abroad image he might have had in mind.
And this is all before he even gets to his actual placement. He's part of the JT program, which sends you to different parts of Japan, and you don't get to choose where you end up. It's like a lottery
Yeah.
system.
Right, the JT program lottery.
Yeah.
He was hoping for a cool city placement, maybe somewhere near those famous Kobe beef restaurants. Instead, he ends up in Yamagata Prefecture, which he humorously describes as being famous for koji cherries. Not exactly the bustling metropolis he was hoping for.
Yamagata may not be the most glamorous location, but it throws him headfirst into authentic Japanese culture and daily life. He describes this long bus ride through vast mountain ranges, a landscape so different from what he was used to.
And remember, this is 2012, so he can't just Google everything on a smartphone. He's relying on paper maps and his own resourcefulness, which forces him to engage with his surroundings in a much more direct way.
He even describes this moment of realization, saying that he's essentially won the Japan lottery, not in the sense of getting a dream location, but in the sense of being forced to truly immerse himself in Japanese culture. He's out of his comfort zone, surrounded by new sights, sounds, even the distinct smell of tatami mats, those traditional Japanese floor coverings.
That tatami smell is so unique, isn't it? It immediately transports you to Japan. But beyond the sensory experiences, he also had to face the language barrier, which is a whole other challenge. He was determined to learn Japanese, but in those early days, he was basically limited to a few phrases and a lot of hand gestures.
It led to some pretty comical misunderstandings, especially when he met his new colleagues at the school where he would be teaching English. Think about walking into a room full of people speaking a language you barely understand. That feeling of being completely out of your depth must have been overwhelming.
And then there's that awkward silence during his first meeting with the school principal. He thought he'd done something wrong, but it turns out that silence, or chinmoku in Japanese, is a perfectly normal part of their communication style.
Jinmoku often stems from Zen Buddhist principles. It emphasizes thoughtful consideration and careful listening, a stark contrast to the fast-paced, talkative nature of many Western cultures.
It's amazing how even something as simple as a pause can have a completely different meaning in another culture. And that's just the beginning of his journey. From here, he dives headfirst into life as an English teacher in a Japanese high school, with all its unique challenges and rewards.
So he's landed in Yamagata, gotten a taste of the culture, and now it's time for the real challenge, teaching English in a Japanese high school.
Talk about a trial by fire. Can you imagine going from fumbling through basic greetings to standing in front of a classroom full of teenagers, trying to teach them a language they might not even be interested in learning?
He definitely felt the pressure. He describes the differences in teaching styles, particularly the emphasis on group dynamics over individual empowerment in Japanese classrooms. He was used to a more Western approach, where you might call on one student to answer a question.
But in Japan, if you single out a student, they're more likely to freeze up, while their classmates might jump in to help. It's a completely different dynamic, and it can be frustrating for someone not used to it.
Yeah, and for Broad, it wasn't just about adapting to a new teaching style. He was also grappling with uninspiring textbooks, a curriculum that prioritized grammar over conversational English, and the challenge of connecting with students who might see English class as more of a chore than an opportunity.
But even amidst the struggles, he found those moments of genuine connection and humor that make the experience worthwhile. Like that hilarious story about his first class, where he tried to do the classic icebreaker game, two truths and a lie.
Oh yes, the classic two truth and a lie game. It's a go-to for teachers around the world.
Exactly. So one of the facts he presented was that he had met the Queen. The students were totally convinced it was true, assuming that any Brit must have had tea with the Queen at some point.
It's a funny reminder of those cultural assumptions we all carry, isn't it? Yeah. We sometimes forget that what seems like common knowledge to us can be completely foreign to someone from a different background.
Absolutely. And of course, he couldn't escape the inevitable question about whether he had a girlfriend, delivered with much giggling from the class. It seems like no matter where you are in the world, teenagers will be teenagers.
That's a comforting thought, in a way. Despite all our cultural differences, there are some universal experiences that connect us.
Definitely. But beyond those universal moments, Broad also introduces us to some of his fellow teachers, each with their own unique personalities. There's Kengo Sensei, who is this incredibly kind and fluent English speaker, who takes Broad to a Hiroshima bombing memorial service.
That experience must have been incredibly powerful. It's a reminder of the weight of history that Japan carries, and the importance of understanding that historical context, even if you're primarily there to teach English.
Absolutely. And then there's Kamako Sensei, who's, well, a bit of a character, to say the least. She was apparently obsessed with Osama bin Laden's love life, which, as you can imagine, didn't really go over well with the students.
It just goes to show that even within a culture that's often perceived as being homogenous, you're going to encounter a wide range of personalities and perspectives. Makes you wonder what other hidden gems he encountered in those teacher break rooms.
It reminds us that every culture is made up of individuals, each with their own quirks and interests. And speaking of personalities, one of the most memorable characters in the book is Roy, this veteran JET participant from New Zealand, who becomes a kind of mentor to Broad. They end up bonding over late-night drinking sessions at traditional Japanese pubs, or izakaya.
Ah, the izakaya. There's so much more than just places to drink. They're these vibrant hubs of social interaction, where people from all walks of life come together to unwind, share stories, and build connections.
Exactly. And Roy introduces Broad to the concept of communication, which is basically the idea that alcohol loosens social inhibitions in Japan, allowing people to express themselves more freely.
It's a fascinating cultural phenomenon, and it helps explain why those late-night izakaya sessions became such important learning experiences for Broad. He wasn't just drinking. He was immersing himself in Japanese social customs.
And let's be honest, those stories about his first encounters with sake are hilarious. He learned the hard way that it can be a lot stronger than it tastes.
I can imagine. It's easy to get caught up in the convivial atmosphere and those endless refills. He tells this great story about being at an izakaya with Roy and some locals, and basically getting sake bombed by these friendly patrons, who keep refilling his cup before he even has a chance to say no.
It's a perfect example of that Japanese hospitality that can be so disarming. It's not always easy to say no when someone is going out of their way to make you feel welcome, even if it means feeling a little worse for wear the next day.
Yeah, it highlights the importance of understanding cultural nuances, especially around things like drinking etiquette. What might be considered polite in one culture can be completely different in another.
Absolutely. But those izakaya experiences were also where Broad started to gain a deeper understanding of Japanese culture. Beyond the tourist brochures and textbooks, he was picking up slang, learning about social customs, and experiencing that unique blend of camaraderie and formality that characterizes so many Japanese interactions.
Yeah, it's that immersive aspect that makes his book so compelling. He's not just observing Japanese culture from a distance, he's living it, making mistakes, learning from them, and sharing those experiences in a way that's both funny and insightful.
And his determination to learn language is inspiring. He was dedicated to mastering Japanese, studying those intricate kanji characters, grappling with the complexities of formal and informal speech, which is known as keigo, and experiencing those aha moments that come with finally being able to understand a conversation or read a sign.
Keigo is a fascinating aspect of the Japanese language. It's a system of honorifics that dictates how you speak to people based on their social status and your relationship with them. It adds another layer of complexity to communication.
It's amazing how he embraced that challenge. And it paid off. He even entered a local Japanese speech contest, which seems like a crazy ambitious goal for someone who had only been studying the language for a year.
It's a testament to his dedication and his willingness to push himself outside his comfort zone. That first attempt didn't go so well, but he didn't give up. He kept studying, kept practicing, and a year later he actually won the contest.
Now, that's what I call dedication. But his victory wasn't just about winning a trophy. It symbolized his integration into Japanese society. It proved that with enough effort, you can bridge even significant cultural gaps. It makes you think. What seemingly impossible challenge could you overcome with that level of commitment?
That's a powerful question. And it speaks to the transformative power of immersing yourself in a new culture. It's not always easy, but the rewards can be immense.
And as he became more fluent and more comfortable navigating the nuances of Japanese culture, he began to see beneath the surface of this seemingly homogeneous society. He encountered complex issues like social pressure, conformity, and even bullying, which is known as ijime in Japan.
Ijima is a serious issue in Japan, and it often stems from the intense pressure to conform to societal expectations. Broad shares a heartbreaking story about a student who took his own life after being bullied, highlighting the devastating consequences of this issue.
It's a difficult topic, but it's important to acknowledge these darker aspects of any culture. Even one as seemingly harmonious as Japan, it reminds us that every society has its challenges. And understanding those challenges is crucial to gaining a deeper understanding of the culture as a whole.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And Broad explores these issues with sensitivity and nuance, showing that even in a country known for its politeness and order, there are complex social dynamics at play.
He also reflects on his own struggles to reconcile his individualistic Western mindset with the Japanese emphasis on group harmony. It's a tension that many people who live abroad experience, that feeling of being caught between two cultures.
It's a delicate balance, and it requires a willingness to adapt and to understand that your way isn't necessarily the only way. Broad even delves into some politically charged territory, talking about his experience creating a video about Japanese swear words, which surprisingly sparked outrage from some online viewers who accused him of being disrespectful to Japanese culture.
It's a fascinating example of how cultural sensitivities can clash in the digital age, particularly when it comes to humor and language. What might seem like harmless fun to one person can be deeply offensive to another, especially when cultural nuances and context are lost in translation.
It raises important questions about cultural appropriation and the responsibility we all have as content creators, especially when we're engaging with cultures different from our own.
It's a reminder that we need to be mindful of the potential impact of our words and actions, even if our intentions are good.
And as Broad continues to grapple with these complexities, he also starts to reflect on his own personal growth. He talks about the challenges and rewards of dating in Japan, navigating those cultural differences in dating norms, and the bittersweet feeling of saying goodbye to people who have become an important part of his life.
He shares a relatable anecdote about going on a date at a gasuto, which is basically a Japanese family restaurant chain, and being surprised by how quickly things escalated. The woman he was seeing basically asked him if they were going to become lovers after just their second date.
It's a classic example of how cultural expectations around dating and relationships can vary drastically. In Japan, there's often this expectation of formally defining the relationship early on, which can feel rushed to someone used to a more casual approach.
And speaking of saying goodbye, Broad's decision to leave Yamagata after 4 years is a turning point in the book. He moves to Sendai, a larger city in the Tohoku region, and begins a new chapter in his life, pursuing his own creative projects. and continuing to explore Japan on his own terms.
It's a reminder that growth often involves taking risks and stepping outside your comfort zone. He could have easily stayed in Yamagata, where he had built a life and found a sense of belonging.
But he felt this pull to explore new horizons and challenge himself creatively, which is something I think a lot of us can relate to.
And those new horizons take him on some incredible adventures. He ends up climbing Mount Fuji, though not without some hilarious mishaps along the way, getting lost in a love hotel in Osaka, and even filming a documentary about cats in Japan, despite not actually being a cat person himself.
It's through those experiences, both the grand and the mundane, that Broad's understanding of Japan continues to deepen. He's moved beyond those initial impressions and superficial observations, and is now engaging with the country on a much more nuanced and personal level.
It's like he's peeling back the layers of an onion, each experience revealing something new and surprising about both Japanese culture and himself.
And in the end, he finds a sense of home in Sendai, a place that allows him to pursue his creative passions, while still being immersed in the Japanese culture that he's come to love.
It's a beautiful reminder that home isn't necessarily a fixed location. It's a feeling of belonging, of being connected to a place and its people, and of finding a space where you can truly be yourself.
Yeah, it's interesting how Broad's journey wasn't just about adapting to Japan's outward customs, but also about understanding those deeper social currents that aren't always obvious to an outsider. He starts to explore issues like social pressure and conformity, things that can be really difficult to grasp unless you've experienced them firsthand.
Yeah, it's like he's peeling back those layers of politeness and order that Japan is known for, and revealing a more complex picture. He even uses the Japanese term ijin, which translates to bullying, to discuss the darker side of this pressure to conform.
And he doesn't shy away from the really tough stuff. He shares a story about a student who tragically took his own life because of bullying. It's a stark reminder of the intense pressure young people in Japan can face to fit in.
Yeah, it makes you think about the hidden costs of that societal harmony that Japan is often praised for. Conformity can have a dark side, and it's something Broad grapples with on a personal level, too.
He talks about feeling that tension between his individualistic Western mindset and the Japanese emphasis on group harmony, that struggle to reconcile those two different ways of being in the world. It's something a lot of people who live abroad can probably relate to.
Yeah, it's that constant negotiation between who you are and where you are. And it's not just about adapting your behavior. It's about understanding those underlying values that shape a culture's way of life.
Broad also gets into some pretty tricky territory when he talks about creating a video about Japanese swear words. It seems harmless enough, but it sparked a wave of online outrage, with some people accusing him of being disrespectful to Japanese culture.
It's a fascinating example of how cultural sensitivities can clash in the digital age, especially when humor is involved. What might seem like a lighthearted joke to one person can be deeply offensive to another, especially when those cultural nuances get lost in translation.
Yeah, it's a good reminder that even with the best intentions, we can still make mistakes when interacting with cultures different from our own. And as content creators, we have a responsibility to be mindful of that.
Absolutely. It's a delicate balance between sharing our authentic experiences and respecting those cultural boundaries. But amidst all these complex societal issues, Broad also shares some really personal reflections on his own growth and relationships. He talks about the ups and downs of dating in Japan, navigating those sometimes confusing cultural differences.
He tells this funny story about a date at a gasuto, which is one of those typical Japanese family restaurants. He's surprised when his date basically asks him if they're going to become lovers after just their second date.
It's a perfect example of how cultural expectations around dating and relationships can be so different. In Japan, there's often this idea of formally establishing a relationship early on, which can feel very different from the more casual dating culture in many Western countries.
Yeah, it highlights the importance of communication and understanding those unspoken expectations. But speaking of goodbyes, there's a pivotal moment in the book when Broad decides to leave Yamagata after 4 years. He moves to Sendai, a bigger city, and starts a new chapter in his life, focusing more on his own creative projects.
It's interesting how he doesn't frame this as a rejection of Yamagata or rural life. It's more about him embracing new challenges and pursuing his own creative passions.
It reminds us that growth often involves taking risks and pushing ourselves outside our comfort zones. He could have stayed in Yamagata, or he had built a life and found a sense of belonging, But he felt that pull towards something more.
And those new horizons lead him on some amazing adventures. He climbs Mount Fuji, gets hilariously lost in a love hotel in Osaka, and even ends up making a documentary about cats in Japan, even though he's not really a cat person himself.
Through all these experiences, his understanding of Japan keeps evolving. He's gone from those first impressions and funny misunderstandings to a much deeper engagement with the country and its people.
It's like he's constantly peeling back those layers, discovering new facets of Japanese culture, and in the process, learning more about himself.
And in the end, he finds a sense of home in Sendai, a place that allows him to pursue his creative work, while still being immersed in the culture he's come to love.
It's a beautiful reminder that home isn't just a place on a map. It's that feeling of belonging, of being connected to a community and a way of life that resonates with you.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into Abroad in Japan, what stands out to you? What are your takeaways from Broad's experiences?
For me, it's that powerful reminder that stepping outside our comfort zones, even if it means facing challenges and making mistakes, can lead to incredible personal growth and a deeper understanding of the world around us. Broad's journey shows us that cultural immersion isn't just about sightseeing and trying new foods. It's about embracing those differences, challenging our own assumptions, and ultimately expanding our sense of what it means to be human.